Everybody, welcome to this episode of Think Business. Really excited and looking forward to talking with Rebecca Starr. Rebecca, it's great to see you. Rebecca is the Vice President of Educational Operations and Regional Strategy for the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. The through line of everything that Rebecca does is, it sounds so simple, but it's so big, and we're going to dive into it today, which is making the Jewish future better in North America and around the world. Rebecca, let's jump into this because after October 7th, the Jewish future looks very, very different to the Jewish people, and I think people who are even observers of this, and we can go into detail about that. But let's break that down and talk about it. And, I want to start wherever you want to start. And so maybe we rewind a little bit and start talking about, making the Jewish future better in North America and around the world. Talk a little bit more about your mission.
Sure. So you're right that a lot of things have changed in the way that the community is thinking about our place on this planet after October 7th. But that was a year and a half ago, and the Jewish people have been around for, 5,000 plus years. So we've been working on this project, this Jewish Peoplehood project, for a long time. It's, from my end and my perspective, working for a place like the Hartman Institute is a very unique and special place, because one of our major ideas and themes is that if you want to bring about positive change, if you want to bring about a better future, and in our case, we're concerned, like you said, with the Jewish community abroad and locally, then you have to find the right ideas that inspire. And this is, I know, what you're all about. So we have incredible thinkers, thought leaders at the helm who are always offering the new understandings of the current moment and reflecting on the rich, beautiful history of the Jewish world, and using all of that to help this community move forward. So the best way to do that, and our theory of change, is around bringing those ideas to the leaders in the communities, whether they're professionals, whether they're rabbis, whether they're lay leaders, whether they're college students, whether they're campus professionals, wherever they are in their work and wherever they are in thinking about and being committed to this project of Jewish peoplehood. We think if you give them the right ideas and help them absorb those ideas and integrate them into their work, it will only be better. One of the things the place that I sit and think about a lot is that I will probably not see the results of my career, my 30-year career, but in 100 years, somebody will, and that is the beauty of this position that I'm in, and the work that we do as an institute.
Best time to plant a tree,
Yeah, that's right what we're doing. Yeah, that's what we're doing.
So let me ask you a question. Let's kind of reverse engineer, rewind a little bit about what you said, which is, I'm really curious on, you have all of these thought leaders coming up with ideas. But coming up with an idea that is something that can be packaged and then presented to somebody, there's a lot that goes into not only the brainstorming of the idea, but what the final idea is, and how that is beta tested and looked at, and the different lenses that it goes through. And so I'd love to talk about, because I do this in business a lot, and when I'm working with clients, whether it's a solopreneur or a Fortune company, right? We're evolving ideas, and I'm under the belief that there's no bad ideas, but there are bad assumptions, and one bad assumption can take down a business, an organization, a community, and so just how does that happen? How does it happen?
It's a really good question. We like to call ourselves an applied think tank, which means that in addition to coming up with these fantastic ideas, you have to figure out how to implement them. And I think that's to the point of what you're trying to ask, is how do we actualize them? Right. I'm going to take you back a little bit to when the Institute was founded in the 70s, the early 70s, by David Hartman, who passed away in 2013. But his vision here was to do exactly as you say, bring all kinds of ideas together in one space in a pluralistic way. people who have perspectives on the right, on the left, up, down, wherever you want to go, and to pick them apart and pull them apart and ask those questions. Is this actually an idea that can serve us well, or is it an idea that we have to reinterpret? Is it an idea that we have to set aside for now? That process is a very Jewish process. That's Judaism as an interpretive tradition, and we have this luxury of sitting in a space in the sort of Jewish textual and study tradition of always asking those questions, of always pushing and always wondering. And so it's and the beauty, and people used to tell us, I mean, I wasn't around, but in the 70s, that David Hartman would just sort of like yell at people and say, like, why are you thinking that? Tell me what you mean. I need to know more. I actually think that is one of the things that we need to be doing more, especially with our young people, is to say, like, analyze this, interpret it, think about it more critically. You may have to throw it out, like you said, but it may also be really something that you can use. And in our work, that's exactly what we're trying to give these leaders. You can push back against it, you can question it, you can wonder about it, you can come up with a whole new idea, but we have to bring it to the table to have the conversation with a lot of different lenses and a lot of different perspectives.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into this. Shalom Hartman Institute, again, the through line of your mission, making the Jewish future better in North America and around the world. In business, we look at indicators, right? And then we look at those indicators and we can then forecast things, and they have a shelf life of sometimes 24 hours, sometimes a little bit longer, because typically in business, we have multiple indicators we're looking at to forecast numbers. We see it on Wall Street all the time. One of the indicators, as we're talking about the Jewish future, is that anti-Semitism is at an all-time high. We are seeing things on university campuses that are, in my opinion, deplorable. Universities that are not protecting their Jewish students. We're seeing things and indicators that I would imagine are really hard to come up with ideas to combat those. And so how does Hartman focus on that?
Great. These are really complicated, good questions. One of the things that we realized after October 7th is that we were not as safe in Israel as we thought we previously were, and we were also not as safe in North America. I'm going to throw Canada in there as well, because they have had a very, very intense uptick in anti-Semitism as well. The question that you're asking is around sort of the indicators, actually goes back a lot longer than
sure. And that I know. I'm not naive to that.
Yeah, and that's like one of the challenges of the moment is, everyone sort of lumps it into, oh God, this is a post-October 7th thing, but actually the roots of anti-Semitism, okay, thousands of years old, right? But beyond that, going forward, speaking specifically at college campuses, the BDS movement has been in play for decades. So it's not a surprise when you live in a polarized, we're speaking on election day, when you live in a polarized country, that people start, kind of moving to those polls. And I think that's exactly what you're seeing with this rise in anti-Semitism. The thing is, the anti-Semitism this time around is both on the right and on the left. So all of these sort of liberal institutions that, again, we used to, especially in the Jewish community, helped build and really honor, that has been a crash for us to understand that those liberal institutions were not the bastions of democracy and also of diversity that we thought they were. So what do you do about it? I mean, these are all indicators. What do we do about it? We are digging in and diving into Jewish identity. So all of these campus professionals, all of these professors, all of the college presidents, all of the people, the young students who are on campus, the best way to combat anti-Semitism is to know yourself. And in a lot of, particularly in the Jewish community, we have failed our children in a lot of ways. We haven't given them a solid, deep understanding of what it means to be part of the Jewish community, what it means to be part of the Jewish people. So we spend a lot of time in that space. That means understanding what it means to have a relationship to Israel. It means what we want them to understand what it means to have a solid Jewish identity, and that doesn't mean it's all about practice, right? Jewish identity can look a lot of different ways. We want them to understand critical and analysis and critical thought and questioning, so that they push back and know how to push back in a way that actually opens the dialogue instead of shuts it down. So I would argue, I guess, in the last year and a half especially, we have leaned into building and growing Jewish identity and Jewish understanding, and equipping leaders with these tools to understand who they are and understand themselves. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, what the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years will look like. But one thing is clear. One indicator that we know is that our kids were not equipped. Our professionals were not equipped. Our teachers were not equipped. So we have a reset. One of the things we learned after October 7th pretty quickly, in addition to all of these crashes, is that when you are confronted with dissonance, right? Like, wait, I thought all this was great, but it's in fact not so great. I have to respond to that dissonance. Our response is dive into who you are, reevaluate how you're learning, reevaluate how you're looking at the news, that's how you're how you're reading, what you're reading, who you're reading, and figure out your place and your role as a leader in that conversation.
I love that. So let's give some more tools. So you identify your place as a leader, you identify your place as a parent, you identify your place, fill in the blank.
Yep.
And so one of the things, again, like in business, right? You can go to a seminar and you can go to a talk, but the key is, can you keep something going? Can you stay consistent in your new habit of an evolved, more conscious narrative, which is what you're talking about. And so, Rebecca, how do we now find these tools that Hartman Institute provides, and then how do we study them, right? How do we say, okay, I'm going to spend, think community. We talk a lot about habits on this show. One of my favorite books that I think should be mandatory reading is Atomic Habits by James Clear. I was just talking about it. Today. Right. And we always need to be looking at our habits. And so, and I talk a lot about doing small things on a daily basis, because that's what compounds to thinking big.
Yep.
And so if somebody wanted to, for example, do a kind of a crash 30-minute, 60-minute education, and then spend 1 to 5 minutes a day, or 1 to 5 minutes 2 or 3 times a day, where does somebody go to plug in?
Yeah, so I agree with you that the habit around growing your own, personal wisdom, knowledge, identity is crucial, and it should probably be part of everybody's practice every day. My sense is that this is not a 1 to 2 minute thing. This is a complicated issue moment. Just as an aside, one of the things we're seeing a lot of conversations from parents who have kids all over, in campuses, who have kids in high school, who are really challenged at the moment. They don't have any tools. They don't have any ideas. They don't have any context as to how we got to this place. So they really have to commit themselves. One of the things that's clear is that you want to find the thinkers that you gravitate to, right? So in my case, there are some members of our faculty who I listen to daily. There are 2 podcasts that come out of the Hartman Institute, and I'm obviously biased, but I recommend them all the time, because if you want to know what's going on in North America, there's one for you. It's called Identity Crisis with Yehuda Kurtzer. If you want to know what's going on in a conceptual way in Israel, Yossi Klein Halevi and Daniel Hartman talk to each other usually twice a week and play it out. So I'm not saying that they're the only thinkers on this. There's a ton of others. There's Haviv Ratigur has a great pod. There are many. Dan Senior has one as well. But the key is to find people who have diversity of opinion. If you listen to the same thing all the time, you won't grow. None of us will. So the habit is, all right, I listened to this voice today. Tomorrow, I'm going to listen to a different voice. I'm going to read a different article. I'm going to read 2 pieces of whatever it is, an opinion piece from one paper and another from a different kind of leaning paper. That's the habit that I would encourage, because otherwise we get stuck in this spiral of scrolling, and you get the same. it takes real conscious work to give yourself a diversity of ideas every single day.
Well, I love what you're talking about, and I agree. I do my best to do that, to kind of, look at two different angles of things, or three or four. I mean, so there's many different angles. One of my favorite Coveyisms is seek first to understand before being understood, and I feel like that's kind of where we are. I have a lot of friends. Many are Democrats, many are Republicans, and there seems to be just so people sometimes. I can have very educated discussions with my friends who are Democrats and Republican. I surrender. I do my best to listen to their point of view. I think everybody is coming from a different place and has different lenses of how they see things from. But how does Hartman help people break down the barrier of the fighting, the infighting? It's like there's so much, I know a lot of people also, if they're Democrats, they defriend the Republicans. The Republicans will defriend the Democrats because there's so not room for understanding the other side.
Yeah, so one of the things we do that I think has been very helpful over the years, this is not new since this moment that we're living in, is to give people frameworks, right? So one of the great frameworks, which I should credit, was Daniel Hartman, who created this, and in his wisdom said, there are some deviances in this world that I can handle, and there are some that I cannot, meaning some are tolerable and some are intolerable. When I have a conversation with someone I disagree with, I try really hard to at least agree that we disagree, that we deviate on what we think, but I can actually tolerate your opinion, because even though it's not mine, I want to talk to you about it, and I want to engage with you about it. When it comes to intolerable deviance, that's sort of a different conversation, right? Like I'm not going to condone murder. If you're a murderer, I'm not going to have that conversation with you, but that's really extreme. So if you think about all of the stuff in between, there's a lot of room and a lot of opportunity to say, like, I really accept what you're saying. We agree. We're on the same page. Or, to me, that feels like a deviance, but I can tolerate it because you've made an argument for me, and I appreciate that argument. So we try and do it through those kinds of framings and frameworks, and of course, it's rooted in Jewish text usually.
Yeah, good. I love that.
Yeah.
I think when you can give somebody a formula of how to look at things and a little bit of structure, that they can be themselves within it, I think that's great. All right, let's go back to, again, I just want to keep on bringing in the through line, making the Jewish future better in North America and around the world, and taking these ideas and being the messenger to leaders, and then sharing with them the ideas, and then how they can then, I'm assuming, implement and execute and put into their world. And so let's talk about that piece of it, because that has I would imagine, an art and a science to it as well.
Yeah, there's this conversation that we have all the time about the impact. How do we know if these ideas, and it's one thing to measure like your bottom line financially, if you're in a for-profit business, how do you measure the impact of an idea? That's a complicated thing. So I guess, to answer that, we think we watch really carefully all of the folks who participate in our programs and educational initiatives, right? So I'll give you an example. We have a group of rabbis who study together, and we've done this for years and years. We have different cohorts, but they study together for 4 years. When Rabbi X enters that cohort in year 1, I will tell you they are changed by year 4. How do we know that? We see it in their sermons. We see it in the way they think about their the growth of their congregation in terms of their professional staff. We see it in the way that they approach their spiritual work, their prayer focus, their prayer work, and we can actually measure that over the course of time. And it's all because they have been exposed to really challenging and complex ideas over the course of a long period of time. So that's the best possible scenario. When we have a group of lay leaders, and when we have a group of professionals or people who are committed to this project, who are willing to commit and keep showing up and make it a habit, we can actually track that their practice changes. The way in which they think about and project their ideas changes. We actually have a project going on. A colleague of mine decided this year she was going to do some research into almost all of the rabbis that are part of this cohort, what their sermons were for Rosh Hashanah. And the results were a significant number of them utilized Hartman ideas to express themselves on the holidays. So here's a really good example of how we understand that. When it comes to other things, like take professional leadership cohorts, for example. We work with a lot of philanthropic leaders, a lot of executive directors. They're making really difficult decisions for the community. We want them to be courageous leaders. So anytime that I see somebody locally or across North America making a courageous decision based on the idea that, they heard one of Hartman's scholars say, let's push you on this a little bit, then I know that the impact is there and that they're taking that risk because they heard something that affected them deeply.
Yeah.
I saw this play out a lot during COVID. That was a really, really difficult time, and they needed, especially professional leaders, school leaders, they needed ideas to help them find their footing and to find their courage.
Yeah.
So we see it play out. We just have to track it.
You have to track it. Yeah, the magic of an idea goes a long way. I want to talk about the courageous leaders you're talking about, because I think sometimes people confuse confidence with courage. Confidence is when you're comfortable, you've done it a ton. Courage is when you're really kind of, you're really doing something out of your comfort zone. It doesn't always, feel comfortable, right? People's insecurities come out, but yet you still decide to jump and do something. And so can you just talk about, we're talking a lot about formulas today, kind of if you can maybe put it in some type of formula on what gets someone to actually not just think about being courageous, but actually being courageous. Yeah.
Well, a big part, we did a little bit of research on this a number of years ago. It actually came out of a problem we were seeing, basically rabbis getting fired because they were offering opinions about Israel that their congregations sort of didn't see as in line with where they were. Well, that's a really big problem, right? Because you in the Jewish world and any world, for the most part, in the liberal world, want a diversity of ideas in the marketplace. So it all came out of this need to educate the people around the rabbis, right? So forget working with the rabbis. We figured out really quickly we need to work with lay leaders and say to them, what are your priorities for your community? Can you make a list here and tell us, like, what kind of a leader do you want? What kind of community do you want? Do you really want to have somebody who just kind of falls in line, or do you want to boost things up and change things around? So we realized really quickly that we needed to bring lay people and the lay leaders into the conversation, and then try to push them to actually make some commitments, right? So one of the things we do try and do is ask people, we don't tell them what those commitments should be, but we say to them, what are your commitments going forward? What are you going to be committed to? Because if you have those commitments in your mind, if you've spelled them out for yourself, it makes it much easier to go through the world and make those difficult, complicated moves, courageous moves. So that's one way. I would say this is not necessarily something that's trainable. It's often learned. So hopefully, if you, again, are exposed to courageous leadership over the course of maybe particularly Jewish history, but beyond, then you start to understand that there is a place for you, for us, for all of us to fill that role. And we really do try. I think our faculty does a great job of saying, like, I see something in you, and I'm gonna follow up with you. I'm gonna start with you when you're in high school. I'm gonna see you on the college campus. I'm gonna see you in your grad program, and I'm gonna follow up with you when you're running your own business and see, how you're leading courageously. Because we started this conversation 10 years ago. That's part of the work.
Yeah. I have led courageously in business, and I have led not courageously in business when, I was insecure, and you're finding your voice in business. And when you find your voice and you can lead with courage, you never go backwards. And so Think Community, I encourage everybody to find their courage. I want to talk about, you're talking about exposing people to things and how they go through the world. And I want to talk about what you were exposed to and how your mentors guided you through the world. You're raised on a sheep farm in Michigan's upper UP.
Yeah, I was.
So talk a little bit about, growing up and your parents and what they exposed you to and how they got you ready for the world.
Well, you're right in what you said. My parents made a choice, kind of after the riots, late 60s, early 70s. Most folks moved out of Detroit and ended up in the suburbs, but my parents made a very conscious decision that they didn't want to do that. They were really sad about leaving Detroit because it was very much a part of who they were. So yeah, they decided to pick me up, and I was born up there. I was born in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, because it was the closest hospital for me to be born in. And they made this decision. I credit them a lot for the decisions that they made. I was raised in a very, everybody was kind of the same, right? Everybody kind of grew up there. There was a history of generations of the same families, and everybody's related. So coming into that as outsiders, I can imagine for them was really hard. Because I was born there, I was an insider. But one of the things they taught me early on is you have to know, we're going back to where we started, you have to know who you are. So they made sure that I was committed to, that they gave me a strong Jewish education, that they took me to New York, they took me to Korea, they took me to Israel, they took me all over the world. That is not something that any of my peers really had an opportunity to do. So they were very aware early on that pluralism, that understanding the diversity of the landscape was crucial. And they did their best, even though they were raising me in this very small place, to bring those insights into my life.
Yeah.
And I credit them for that, for doing that. And I think then when I went to college, I went to U of M, I think my eyes really, really opened further and wider. And working in the field for a long time, in the field of social work, education, Jewish communal service, you start to realize that if you stay stuck in one tunnel, it's not good for anybody.
Yeah.
And I learned that, relatively early on, that the bigger the conversation, the better we all are for it. But I really do think that my parents putting me in this really kind of small, similar, everywhere community where everyone's similar, actually the result was I had a very kind of big need to understand the bigger, more complex global world.
But so that's great. I love that story. But let's talk about alignment for a minute, because then it all comes kind of back into alignment, right? The through line lesson that they're teaching you have to know who you are, is exactly in alignment with Shalom Hartman Institute, which is, especially it has been, and more so with the hyper focus it seems now, knowing who you are.
Yeah.
And so what are, to somebody who is listening to this, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, right? How does somebody begin to get to know who they are?
Well, I always think it starts with your family of origin, and that could mean your birth family or your religious family, but however you determine that, they gave you something. In some cases, it's not good stuff, right? Some people have had really difficult experiences with their early entry into the world. But when you start with that, it gives you a lot of insight as to who you are now. So I think it's crucial to always look back from where you came, the gifts, the benefits, the challenge, all the things that we all confronted. But then the task is really, really, then the task really begins. Okay, I'm going to take this piece of what I learned, and I'm going to hold on to it, and I'm going to use it, and I'm going to bring it forward. But this piece I'm going to throw out, and I really have to dissect and analyze all of those things, and not just take them as a given and take them as assumptions. I really want to push back on the things that you assume, that one assumes. So I think for me personally, my origin and upbringing in the Upper Peninsula on a sheep farm is a huge part of who I am. It transfers to me every single day of my life. Every time I put the garden in the spring, every time I go and pick strawberries and turn them into jam, that is connected to the way in which I was raised. It's who I am, and I know that's an integral part of myself. And along the way, I've sort of adapted and changed and picked up other things. And I think what's incumbent on all of us is just to pay attention to it, right? Just to pay attention to it. That's the key. And to make those choices, say, this one's good for me, I'm hanging on to it. This one's not so good, I can let that go.
Yeah. I do a lot of reading. I've been in a lot of therapy, and I have a couple of thoughts on that, because I think a lot of times we kind of inherit this, what we believe are facts, but they're just belief systems that just don't work for us any longer, that we took ownership of, that they don't belong to us. And so, part of it is, at least for me, it's been, okay, so that wasn't my belief. That was somebody else's belief, my father, my mother, my this. And so I took that belief on as a fact, when really it's not a fact. And so I think one of the things I've learned is changing your belief system changes the facts, and pausing for a moment to see if it's your voice or somebody else's voice, and how much influence that person has. And that's part of the journey, I think, of finding your own voice. One of the things I do when I'm doing, I do this when I'm working with clients, but I do it more so when I'm doing keynotes or talks. I actually just did it at a talk I gave last week for about 100 and some people. Part of the 4-hour day was rewriting your narrative. It was rewriting your narrative. And I took them, if it was December 31st, 2025, as if it was that day, and to write what happened over the course of the year as if it already happened. And when I talk about that, as far as rewriting narratives, I do it for myself, and I incorporate it into things I do for clients. People really love that exercise. There's a freedom and a way to begin to shed what isn't theirs and doesn't belong anymore. So I love everything you're talking about. Let's talk about Shalom Hartman and 2025. We're going to have a new president. We don't know who that is yet. We're recording this a little bit early. And so what does 2025 look like in your world, for your work, and what you're doing to, generate ideas and spread these ideas and making the Jewish future better, again, North America and around the world?
We have a lot of challenges, because not only is this country of America and in the moment of election, and so we don't really know what's coming in the next few months. Israel is also kind of in a very difficult moment, not only in terms of war, but also in terms of the challenges around political leadership, and a lot of conflict within the population about where they think that particularly that country should go. I have the honor, I guess, of being entrenched in both of those worlds. But for the Hartman Institute, the idea is to try and figure out, how can we make North American Jewry thrive, even in times of crisis, in times of turmoil? What's our civic duty? What's our civic responsibility as Jews living in America? Because our text is full of ideas about how that can look and how that should look. What's our responsibility around optimism? What's our responsibility around pushing the work forward and not kind of reiterating the same narratives over and over again? Yes, anti-Semitism is really challenging right now, but guess what? There has been no other place in the history of Jews and over the last 2,000 years of safety, security, success as this country, as America, right? So we have to hold on to that, build into that, and use I'm going to use this word power, but the Jewish community does have power to promote and bring out positive change. So that's what we're focused on. And we do that, like I said, through finding those leaders who see it and who are able to help us move it. Same thing in Israel. Our folks there, we have 2 high schools there. They're working with these young leaders who are going to make Israel the Israel that we want it to be. The president of the Institute, Yehuda Kurtzer, tells this, it's not a story, but he shares, before 1948, Israel was just an imaginary place. We could dream it up. We could imagine what it could be. But guess what? For the last 76 years, we have it. There is no room and no place for imagining, because we've been building. But maybe it's time to think again around the imagining. What can it be? What should it be? What Jewish values must find their way into this incredibly, amazing and bizarre and unique country that we're trying to build. So I do think they're two different conversations, but actually they overlap, because it's all about dreaming and visioning for what the future could bring, and getting ourselves out of this, again, like tunnel vision.
Yeah.
That's and what we're on about.
And what's everybody's responsibility individually, to be part of that building process? Everybody, or most everybody that's listening to this, and many people who are Jewish and not Jewish, who support the Jewish people, who support Israel, what's everybody's small little part?
It's a really good question, and it's a huge question, because I feel a lot of responsibility in answering it. For the Jewish community, I'm going to go back to what I said. We have an obligation to increase our learning, to increase our knowledge, to increase our wisdom, and to not leave it up to some institution or some educator. It is our job to do it. It's our job to teach our children, nobody else's. This is a new narrative for us, but I am calling out all of the Jewish community to take on the responsibility to do the learning and push themselves. I would say to those folks kind of outside of the Jewish world, we need your advocacy, we need your allyship, and realizing that is really hard right now. Anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are getting combined, for better and for worse. That's a really challenging thing to do. But the non-Jewish world, we need allies out there who understand the complexity of this moment, that it goes well beyond the Palestinian-Israel conflict. This is not only that. This is a bigger, more complex, very difficult regional situation. Yeah. And I hear way too much snippets of, it's, Israel-Palestine. That's a piece of this. It's not the whole piece. And if if our allies and our friends really don't dive into it and understand it with us, we are lost. So I think that's a big part of it. And of course, it makes sense that I'm saying this. It all evolves around education, and that's what I do, and that's where I focus. So to me, that's the beginning of what is needed, and probably will ultimately lead us to better space.
One last section I'd love to talk about, or one last area. You're talking about education. We've been talking about courage. We have a lot of kids Jewish kids on college campuses. Many, not all, are affected by encampments. A lot of anti-Semitism that they see on walls, on posters. We're seeing teachers who are anti-Semitic, giving worse grades, calling out Jewish students right now. The educational system in those small pockets, I'll say, requires someone to either be quiet and say nothing because they need a class in order to get into law school or grad school or medical school, or be courageous and risk their future. So what do these kids and the parents of these kids do?
As someone who's getting ready to send a kid to college, it's really on my mind. And you have one or two in college.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Who have not, let me just say, who have not experienced this in the colleges that they're at. They have not experienced this, but I know plenty of people who have.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the responses are all different from these students, right? One is to just recognize that everybody has to do what they have to do. And I accept and appreciate that. And I don't think it's our business to kind of push. Another is these students have to be the strong ones, and they have to be the ones making the effort, not their parents. The students are the ones who have to do this. It's not the parents. Now, that doesn't mean that the alumni community, the boards, the regents, all of that, they play a role, but we have to empower our students to know that this is on them. This is their leadership moment. It's not on us as their parents. They have to make those decisions, and they have to decide, am I going to stand up here? Am I comfortable speaking out? Or is this a place where I need to step back? I do think that there's a time and place, and helping those kids figure out what that time and place is maybe the parents' role. or the Hillel role or teacher faculty role, but they have to make those decisions on their own. We have to empower them to do it. We also have to keep them safe. So my answer to that is everyone's different and they need to educate themselves. And again, we send a lot of these kids to campuses unprepared. So we need to educate them. Hartman can help do that. There's plenty of other places that can help do that. And then they have to decide what their priorities and their commitments are going to be. And we can't do it for them.
Well, it goes back to something you said when we started this conversation, is that we have a responsibility to learn ourselves and to give our children tools. And now it's very obvious that we have more tools to learn, and we have more tools to teach and to give, and to make it part of the through line of our new narrative of how we kind of move through the day, move through life.
Yeah, every conversation is an important one, and we have to make the time to do it. And you know, I will out our family a little bit. Like we breathe and live and breathe this stuff every day, and we talk about it a lot with our kids. And sometimes I feel like they just say, "We got this. Don't stop talking to us about it. We got it." That's the point where we want all of our kids to get to, right? We want them to be able to be empowered and courageous enough to say, in this moment, here's how I'm going to respond. In this moment, I might respond a little differently, but I have the tools to do that.
Rebecca, this was great. I love this talk. Rebecca Starr, Vice President of Educational Operations and Regional Strategy at Shalom Hartman Institute. Rebecca, tell everybody where they can connect with you, learn more, anything about the programs that you offer, your ideal type of people that you are of service to, et cetera.
Great. So I think, we're open to everybody who's interested in learning. So definitely that's probably your entire listenership. I would definitely recommend going to hartman.org. There's a ton of resources, all kinds of articles, all kinds of journals, all kinds of things that you can explore, videos from our scholars. If you want to start slowly, I'm going to go back to Identity Crisis and For Heaven's Sake. These are two exceptional podcasts that we have to offer. It's a good entree point to understand the types of conversations that we're having. And I think, it's a great place to start. Everybody can always contact me too. I'm happy to share my email as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's Rebecca.Starr, Starr, 2 R's, at shalomhartman.org.
That's great. Rebecca, I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate so much what you're doing, not only locally in the community, regionally, nationally, internationally, and all over the world to make a difference. One idea can have magic that really changes the world. And for an organization that is just constantly creating ideas and then educating people on what those ideas are and then how to make change, it just has a major compounding effect. And so I'm grateful for the work that you've done and that you continue to do. I think community, I always like to extract one thing at minimum. There's so many things that we talked about today, but I think one of the most important through lines is you have to know who you are. And that was something your parents shared with you at a very early age. You found your passion in Shalom Hartman Institute, which was in alignment with the very thing that you were raised off of. In community, we talk a lot about alignment, and when you're aligned, your passion comes through. And when you're passionate about something, people then listen to you because you have influence. Rebecca, I appreciate the influence you have and the way that you use it for good to make the world a better place. So thank you so much. Think community. If you want to reach Rebecca, you can reach her at, give them your email one more time.
Rebecca.Starr, 2 R's, at shalomhartman.org.
That's great. And you can reach me at johndwaskin.com. Rebecca, thank you so much.
Thank you, John, for having me. I appreciate it.